On the night, everything changed. Emily had no idea that the old woman sitting alone near the window would turn her entire life upside down. The diner was nearly empty, the kind of quiet that made every sound feel louder than it should. A spoon clinked against a ceramic cup. The neon sign outside flickered against the rain-streaked glass. Emily wiped down the counter with tired hands, trying to push through the last hour of her shift like she had done so many times before. She was 24, overworked, underpaid, and used to being invisible to people who only saw the uniform and not the person wearing it. But that night, something felt different. The front door opened with a slow chime, and in walked an elderly woman dressed in a simple gray coat, carrying nothing but a small handbag and an air of quiet dignity. She looked like she had come in from the cold after a very long day, and though her steps were careful, her eyes were steady. Emily noticed the way the room seemed to shift when the woman sat down. There was something about her presence, something calm and unshaken, that made Emily glance up more than once. Before she could walk over to offer a menu, a harsh voice cut through the silence. Seriously? This place still lets people like you sit wherever they want. A man at the back booth, loud enough for everyone to hear, was already staring at the old woman with open contempt. He was the kind of customer every waitress learned to dread, the kind who thought money gave him permission to treat people like dirt. He leaned back in his seat, smirking as if the entire diner existed for his amusement. Maybe the staff should help her find a nursing home instead of letting her waste a table. The old woman said nothing. She only looked at him once, then lowered her gaze to the table in front of her. That silence seemed to irritate him even more. He laughed, snapped his fingers, and called Emily over like she was a servant instead of an employee. "Hey," he said sharply. "Tell her to move. I don't want to eat next to that." Emily froze for half a second. She had heard rude customers before, had swallowed insults before, had been told by managers to keep her head down and not make trouble. But something about the way this man spoke to the woman, so casually cruel, so certain he would never be challenged, made something hot and defiant rise in her chest. She walked over slowly, feeling every eye in the room settle on her. The old woman finally looked up, and when their eyes met, Emily saw not fear, not embarrassment, but a strange kind of patience, as if she were waiting to see what Emily would do. The man tilted his chin and said, "Well, are you going to handle this, or should I do it myself?" Emily took a breath, squared her shoulders, and made a choice that would change everything. Emily's hands trembled slightly as she stood between the man and the old woman, but her voice came out steady. "No," she said. "She's a customer. If you have a problem, you can leave." For a second, the diner went completely silent. Even the rain tapping against the windows seemed to fade into the background. The man blinked, as if he couldn't believe a waitress had just spoken to him that way. Then his face darkened. "Do you know who I am?" he snapped, planting both hands on the table. "You work here. That means you do what I say." Emily held her ground. "Not tonight." The old woman slowly raised her eyes again, watching Emily with a quiet expression that made it impossible to tell what she was thinking. The man gave a sharp, humorless laugh and leaned forward, lowering his voice just enough to make it more threatening. "Listen carefully. I could have your manager here in 2 minutes. I could have this dump shut down by morning. All I have to do is make one phone call." Emily felt a surge of panic, but she didn't move. She could already imagine the consequences, her manager angry, her paycheck gone, maybe her whole job lost over a single moment of defiance. But then she looked at the old woman's thin hands resting calmly on the table, and that fear shifted into something else. Something stronger. "Go ahead," Emily said. "Make the call. But you're not humiliating her in front of me." A few customers near the window exchanged uneasy glances. One man lowered his coffee cup slowly, pretending not to watch, while a young couple at the corner booth looked ready to leave. The bully stood up halfway from his seat, then pointed a finger at Emily's face. "You're making a huge mistake." "Maybe," Emily replied, "but it's still the right one." That only made him more furious. He barked for the other waitress, demanding to know why staff were allowing this nonsense. And when no one rushed over fast enough, he slammed his palm against the tabletop hard enough to make the silverware jump. The old woman finally spoke, her voice soft but clear. "Young man," she said, "you are drawing a great deal of attention to yourself." The bully turned toward her, scoffing. "And what are you going to do about it?" She didn't answer right away. Instead, she looked at Emily for a long moment, and in that silence there was something unsettling, something almost protective. Then she reached into her handbag very slowly, not as if she were searching for a wallet, but as if she were choosing exactly the right moment to reveal something. Emily's heart pounded. The man's smirk widened, thinking he had cornered both of them. "Let me guess," he said. "You're going to pay and leave, and she's going to pretend this never happened?" The old woman's fingers brushed against a small object inside the bag, and her expression changed just slightly. Not afraid, not angry, decided. "No," she said. "I think," she added, "you are going to regret speaking to me that way." And for the first time that night, the bully's smile began to fade. The bully let out a short laugh, but it sounded forced now, thinner than before. "You're bluffing," he said, though his eyes had already started moving toward the old woman's hand. Emily noticed it too, the first crack in his confidence. The room had gone so quiet that even the kitchen door swinging in the back sounded too loud. The old woman's fingers rested on the edge of her handbag, still calm, still measured, as if she were in no hurry at all. That calmness was more unsettling than any raised voice could have been. "Miss," Emily whispered, unsure whether she should be speaking or stepping back, "are you okay?" The woman gave the faintest nod. "I am, dear." Then she looked at the bully again. "But I'm not. Sure, I can say the same for you." He scoffed and took a step closer, trying to reclaim control with body language alone. "Look, lady, I don't care who you think you are. This is a public place, and I'm not taking disrespect from some random old woman and a waitress with an attitude problem." Emily felt her jaw tighten. Random old woman. He had no idea how wrong he was. The old woman slid 2 fingers beneath the flap of her handbag, and the bully's eyes narrowed. He was clearly expecting a wallet, maybe a credit card, maybe some kind of phone call to prove she was bluffing. But instead, she withdrew a simple black phone with an unfamiliar emblem on the back. She didn't unlock it. She only held it in her hand, letting the sight of it settle over the room like a cold draft. Then she said, "You mentioned calling someone who could shut this place down." Her voice was almost gentle. "That would be unnecessary. The person I'm calling now already knows exactly where I am." The bully crossed his arms. "Sure. And I'm the mayor." Emily nearly smiled despite the tension, but the old woman wasn't done. She placed the phone on the table, and the screen lit up with a secure incoming call before it could even ring. The name displayed was not one Emily recognized, but the man's face changed the moment he saw it. A flicker of uncertainty, then confusion, then a tiny pulse of fear he couldn't completely hide. "What is that?" he demanded. The old woman ignored him and answered on speaker. A male voice responded immediately, deep and respectful. "Madam, we've been trying to reach you. Is everything all right?" The bully stared at the phone as if it had personally betrayed him. Emily's breath caught. The man on the line continued, "Should I send someone?" The old woman's gaze stayed on the bully. "Not yet," she said. "I want him to stay." The bully's expression twisted. "Stay for what?" he barked, but his voice had lost its edge. The old woman finally leaned back in her chair, her posture as elegant and composed as ever, and said, "For the part where he learns who he has been threatening." There was another pause. Then the voice on the phone spoke again, this time colder. "Put the man on speaker. I need to hear this." Emily's heartbeat hammered in her ears. Something was coming. Something much bigger than a rude customer throwing his weight around. The old woman lifted her eyes, and the room seemed to sharpen around them. "You wanted a witness," she said quietly. "Now you have one." The bully looked around the diner as if expecting someone to laugh and call this some kind of joke. But nobody did. The only sound was the faint crackle of the speakerphone and the rain tapping harder against the windows. Emily could feel her own pulse in her throat now. The old woman's calm had shifted the atmosphere completely, turning the room from awkward tension into something sharp and unnerving. The man on the phone spoke again, slower this time, each word carrying weight. "Madam, if Mr. Lawson is present, you should not be dealing with this alone." The bully blinked. His posture changed almost immediately. "Wait," he said, his voice suddenly less certain. "Who the hell is Lawson?" The old woman did not answer right away. She folded her hands in front of her on the table, watching him with a look that wasn't angry, exactly, but carried the quiet certainty of someone who had seen far more of life than he ever would. "You," she said at last. are standing in a diner across from a woman you thought you could intimidate. He forced out a laugh, though it came out strangled. Lady, I think you've got the wrong idea. I was just trying to humiliate me, she asked. Her tone remained gentle, which somehow made it worse. To make a scene because you believed no one would stop you? His mouth opened, then closed. Emily watched the color draining from his face by degrees, as if some invisible hand had finally started pulling the curtain back on the lie he had been living inside. Then the voice on the phone said, Madam, do you want me to contact the regional office now? The bully's head snapped up. Regional office? He repeated. What regional office? The old woman finally reached into her handbag again, this time pulling out a small leather case. She opened it with deliberate care and slid an identification card across the table toward the center. It glinted under the diner lights. Emily leaned forward before she could stop herself. The card looked official, too official for anyone to dismiss. The bully squinted at it, then recoiled as if he'd touched something hot. No, he muttered. No, that's not possible. The old woman's expression didn't change. You may read it if you like, she said. Or perhaps you prefer to continue pretending you have power here. He didn't move. His eyes darted from the card to her face and back again. He had been so loud, so arrogant, so convinced the world would bend for him. Now he looked like a man trapped in a room he no longer understood. Emily could hardly believe what she was seeing. The woman he had mocked, insulted, and threatened had not only endured his behavior without flinching. She had clearly been waiting for the exact moment to reveal herself. The man on the phone spoke once more, and this time his voice sounded final. Confirm the name on the card. Emily read it first, her lips barely moving. Then she looked up, stunned. The bully swallowed hard. His hands, which had been so eager to pound tables and point fingers, now hung useless at his sides. Madam, the voice on the phone said, if he has threatened you, we will handle it immediately. The old woman tilted her head slightly. He has done more than threaten me, she replied. He has shown everyone here exactly who he is. And with that, the bully's face crumpled into the first real fear of the night. The bully took a step back so fast he nearly tripped over the chair behind him. The confidence that had filled him only minutes earlier had vanished completely, replaced by something raw and ugly, panic. He stared at the identification card on the table, as if looking at it long enough might somehow make it disappear. Emily could see the sweat gathering at his hairline now. His mouth opened, but no words came out. The old woman remained perfectly still, her calm somehow more powerful than any shouting could have been. The caller on speaker waited in silence, as if giving the man one final chance to understand what kind of situation he had walked into. At last, the bully laughed weakly, though nobody in the diner believed him anymore. This is insane, he muttered. You can't just pull out some card and act like that means anything. The old woman's eyes lifted to his with unshakable steadiness. Then perhaps, she said, you should wait for the authorities to confirm it. The phrase hit him like a blow. For the first time, he looked not at Emily, not at the old woman, but at the room itself, as if only now realizing how many people had witnessed everything. A young couple by the window had stopped pretending to eat. The man in the corner booth had turned halfway in his seat. Even the cook had stepped out from the back, wiping his hands on a towel, his expression dark and unreadable. There was nowhere for the bully to hide anymore. He tried one last time to reclaim control, lifting his chin and forcing his voice to sound strong. You think I'm scared of some rich old lady and a phone call? But the tremor in his voice ruined the performance. Emily noticed it instantly. So did everyone else. The old woman slowly picked up the card, tucked it back into its leather case, and rested both hands on the table again. You are not afraid of me, she said. You are afraid of consequences. That sentence landed harder than any insult. The bully's jaw tightened. He looked around the diner, but the expressions staring back at him were no longer annoyed or curious. They were disgusted. The caller on speaker cleared his throat. Madam, do you want me to instruct security to arrive? Emily heard a chair scrape behind the counter as the manager finally came out of the office, drawn by the tension that had spread through the room like smoke. What's going on here? He demanded. But when he saw the old woman, his face changed instantly. Not because he recognized her personally, at least not yet, but because he understood there was trouble of a completely different kind now. The bully noticed that reaction too. His expression flickered, desperate now, searching for any crack in the wall. "I didn't do anything wrong," he said quickly. "She's the one making this a scene." Emily almost laughed at the absurdity of it. He had insulted, threatened, and humiliated an elderly woman in front of half the diner, and still he was trying to rewrite the story. The manager looked from Emily to the old woman and then to the card on the table. "Sir," he said carefully, "I think you should sit down. Don't tell me what to do." The bully snapped, but the words came out weak. The manager didn't blink. "No," he said, "I think you've said enough for tonight." And with that, the last thread holding the bully upright began to unravel. The bully looked as if the floor had dropped out from under him. He kept glancing from the old woman to the manager, then to Emily, as though the room itself had become a trap with no visible exit. The manager stood near the counter now, his expression tight with concern, while the cook remained half-hidden behind the swinging kitchen door, watching in silence. Even the customers who had been pretending not to pay attention were fully invested now, their faces turned openly toward the table. The old woman's composure never faltered. She sat with her back straight, one hand resting lightly beside the leather case, the other near her phone. It was as if she had all the time in the world, and the entire diner had simply become a stage for a truth she already knew would surface. Emily felt a strange knot tighten in her stomach. Not fear, exactly, but the kind of suspense that comes right before a door opens and changes everything. The bully swallowed hard. "Look," he said, trying and failing to sound reasonable. "This is being blown way out of proportion. I was having a bad night, okay? I didn't mean anything by it." The words were so weak that even he seemed embarrassed to have said them. The old woman turned her head slightly. "You didn't mean to call me a waste of space?" she asked. "You didn't mean to threaten a young woman's job because she refused to let you degrade a stranger?" Every sentence she spoke sounded calm, but each one landed with precision. The bully wiped a hand down his face, then dragged his fingers through his hair, an action that once might have looked casual but now only made him appear more desperate. "I didn't know who you were," he muttered. "That," the old woman replied, "is exactly the problem." The caller on. Speaker spoke again, his tone no longer patient. "Madam, do you want the local police informed now, or would you prefer internal security to handle the matter first?" That question shifted the entire room. The bully's head snapped toward the phone. "Police," he repeated. "Wait, this doesn't have to go that far." Emily watched him twist in place, suddenly aware that every rude word, every threat, every sneer had built to this moment. There was no charm left, no money, no attitude that could rescue him now. The manager stepped closer to the table, looking at Emily first as if to confirm what he had already seen. "Did he threaten you?" he asked quietly. Emily hesitated, then nodded once. She could feel her own heartbeat in her ears. The bully turned toward her so fast it was almost comic, except nothing about the room felt funny anymore. "Come on," he said, desperation leaking into his voice. "You know this is crazy. Tell them I didn't do anything." Emily looked at him for a long moment. This was the same man who had spoken to the old woman like she was nothing. The same man who had tried to use fear to control everyone in the room. And now he wanted mercy. But mercy was not what the night required. "You did enough," she said quietly. The old woman's gaze shifted to Emily, and for the first time, something like approval warmed her otherwise unreadable expression. It was subtle, but Emily saw it. And in that brief moment, she understood that the real danger had never been the bully's words. It had been the belief that no one would ever challenge him. Now that belief was gone. The old woman lifted the phone slightly and said, "Yes, please proceed." The caller answered at once, "Understood." The bully exhaled sharply, almost stumbling backward again. "No, wait." But the old woman was already reaching for the leather case, her movements smooth and certain. Emily had the strange feeling that whatever happened next would not just end the argument. It would end his entire night. The silence that followed was heavier than anything that had happened before. The bully stood frozen in place, his face pale and slick with sweat, his hands hanging useless at his sides. Emily could see the exact moment he understood that the night had slipped completely beyond his control. The old woman remained seated, unshaken, while the manager stood nearby like a man waiting for the truth to finish arriving. Then the front door opened, not with the casual chime of a customer, but with a sharp, purposeful movement that made everyone in the diner turn at once. A tall man in a dark coat stepped inside, His expression controlled and alert, and the atmosphere changed instantly. He crossed the floor without hesitation, his eyes landing on the old woman first. "Madam," he said with unmistakable respect, "I came as soon as I heard." The bully stared at him in confusion. Emily did too, though the man's demeanor alone suggested he was not someone to be dismissed lightly. He looked polished, composed, and entirely out of place in the fluorescent light of the diner. He stopped beside the table and gave a brief nod to the old woman before glancing at the identification card lying near her hand. "Are you injured?" he asked. She shook her head. "No, only irritated." The man's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, as if that answer was enough to say the situation had already gone too far. Then he turned his attention to the bully. The shift was immediate. The man's gaze was not loud or theatrical, but it was cold in a way that made the bully visibly shrink. "Do you have any idea," he asked, "who you are speaking to?" The bully swallowed. I was just—" "No," the man interrupted. "You were not just anything. You threatened her. In public. In front of witnesses." The bully tried to straighten, but it only made him look smaller. "I didn't know," he said quickly, looking around the room as if searching for someone, anyone, to support him. "How was I supposed to know?" The woman gave a faint, tired sigh, then nodded toward the identification card. The man picked it up, holding it carefully between two fingers, and when he read the name on it, something in his face hardened even further. Emily had no idea what was written there, but the reaction was enough to tell her it mattered. "Very much. You really chose this place," the man said quietly. "To behave like this?" The bully's mouth opened, closed, then opened again. Nothing came out. The man continued, voice still calm, but now carrying unmistakable authority. "This is not a misunderstanding. This is misconduct, intimidation, and public harassment. You've made a very serious mistake." The manager wiped a hand over his mouth, clearly trying to process everything at once. The customers had gone dead still. Even the cook had stepped fully out of the kitchen now, frozen in place with a towel in his hand. Emily stood rooted beside the table, her mind racing. The old woman had not been helpless for a single second. She had known exactly who she was, exactly who would arrive, and exactly what the bully had just done to himself. The man in the dark coat returned the card to her with both hands, almost ceremonially. "Madam," he said, "tell me what you would like us to do." The bully let out a strangled breath, his eyes darting around wildly now, finally realizing that the power he had flaunted all night had vanished in an instant. And from the look on the old woman's face, she was only just beginning to decide his fate. The bully's breathing turned shallow and uneven as the man in the dark coat stood beside the table, waiting for an answer that would decide everything. For the first time all night, the bully had nothing left to say. The old woman folded her hands, studying him with a calm that felt almost merciful, though mercy was the last thing he deserved. Emily could see his thoughts moving across his face in a frantic blur. Denial, fear, bargaining, regret, each one arriving too late to matter. The man in the coat spoke again, this time directly to the manager. "Please ensure no one disturbs Madam while we sort this out." The manager nodded immediately, his own uncertainty giving way to a nervous kind of obedience. The diner had shifted from a place of ordinary service to a room where consequences were being announced in real time. The bully noticed it too. He looked around as if expecting someone to rescue him, but no one moved. No one spoke. Even his earlier confidence had become embarrassing in the stillness. The old woman finally broke her silence. "Do you know," she asked, "him? What is most disappointing about tonight?" He didn't answer. He couldn't. "It isn't your rudeness," she continued. "It isn't even your arrogance. It is the ease with which you believed you could punish a stranger simply because you felt powerful." Emily watched him flinch at every word. The man in the coat stood without interruption, arms at his sides, his expression unreadable but clearly severe. The old woman reached for her phone and tapped once. Immediately, the voice on speaker returned. "Madam, document everything," she said. "His behavior, the threats, the witnesses. I want every detail preserved." The bully's head lifted sharply. "Wait, document." His voice cracked on the word. The old woman looked at him almost sadly. "You thought this was a moment that would pass," she said. "But moments like this do not vanish simply because you regret them later. That landed harder than Emily expected. The room seemed to absorb it. The man in the coat stepped forward and addressed the bully with a level tone that somehow made the words even more devastating. You will not be leaving here with any illusion that this ends quietly. Your conduct has already been reported. The bully's face lost its last trace of color. No, listen, he said quickly, backing away from the table. I can apologize. I can fix this. I didn't know who she was. The old woman's gaze stayed fixed on him. And if you had known, she asked, would you have behaved better? He froze. The answer never came, because everyone in the room already knew it. Emily felt a bitter kind of clarity settle inside her. He had not been brave enough to stand up for himself when it mattered, only cruel enough to target someone he assumed was vulnerable. That was who he was. Nothing more. The man in the coat pulled out his phone and sent a message with quick, deliberate movements. The bully saw it happen and made a sound that was almost a whimper. Please, he said, the word stripped bare now, no longer sharp or arrogant. I made a mistake. The old woman let the silence hang for another beat before answering. Yes, she said. You did. Then, with a slight tilt of her head, she added, and now everyone here knows it. The bully lowered his eyes. The fight had gone out of him completely. The manager looked as if he wanted to say something but thought better of it. Emily stood very still, realizing that the punishment was not just what would happen next. The real punishment was that he had been seen, clearly and completely, for exactly who he was. By the time the man in the dark coat finished speaking into his phone, the bully had gone completely still, as if movement itself might make the situation worse. No one in the diner pitied him now. Not the customers. Not the manager. Not even Emily, who had spent the whole night holding her breath through the cruelty he had thrown at a stranger for no reason at all. The old woman sat in quiet control, her expression composed in a way that made the entire room feel smaller around her. You may leave, the man in the coat said at last, his tone final. But do not think this is over. The bully looked up sharply, desperate for some sign of escape. I said I was sorry, he muttered. It sounded weak even to him. The old woman rose slowly from her seat, smoothing the front of her gray coat with one hand. When she stood, there was no trace of fragility in her posture. She looked exactly like what she had always been, a woman accustomed to being obeyed, not because she demanded fear, but because she had earned respect long before anyone in that diner had ever seen her. Emily watched as the old woman turned toward her. For a brief second, the noise of the room seemed to disappear. You were very brave tonight, the woman said. Emily blinked, caught off guard. I just couldn't let him talk to you like that. The old woman gave a small, approving nod. That, she replied, is precisely why you will go far in life. The words landed softly, but Emily felt them deeply. She had spent so long trying to make it through long shifts, difficult customers, and a life that rarely seemed to notice her. But now, in this strange and unforgettable moment, she understood that standing up for someone else had revealed something about herself too. Not just her courage, her character. Her manager cleared his throat nervously, trying to recover some semblance of normalcy, but the mood in the diner had already changed beyond repair. The bully stood near the door, looking smaller than anyone Emily had ever seen him. The man in the coat stepped beside him and spoke in a low voice that carried enough authority to make the bully flinch. Whatever happened next would happen outside the diner, far away from the eyes of the customers who had watched everything unfold. The old woman picked up her handbag and glanced once around the room. Thank you all for your patience, she said calmly, as if she had merely interrupted a routine evening rather than dismantled a man's arrogance piece by piece. Then she looked at Emily one last time. Do not let people like that make you forget who you are, she said. Emily nodded, unable to find her voice. The old woman gave her one final, knowing smile and walked out into the rain with the man in the coat beside her. The diner door closed behind them, and the room remained frozen for a moment longer before the spell finally broke. The customers began murmuring. The manager exhaled shakily. The cook muttered something under his breath. And the bully, once so loud, so certain, so full of himself, left without another word, his shoulders hunched, his arrogance shattered. Emily stood behind the counter for a long moment after they were gone, staring at the empty seat by the window. What had begun as a simple shift had ended as a night she would never forget. She had defended a stranger. She had faced down cruelty, and without knowing it, she had stood up for someone far more powerful than anyone in the room had imagined. The lesson lingered with her long after the rain stopped. Courage does not always arrive with certainty. Sometimes it arrives in a trembling voice, in a steady gaze, in the choice to do the right thing before you understand the full truth.